What is international studies? International studies is the interdisciplinary study of globalization. It's a program, not a department. It's like urban studies and women's studies. It draws its faculty members from other departments. International studies is about the contemporary world. Its starting point is 1945 and the liberal international order the Americans were able to construct in opposition to the Soviet Union. International studies is about the long legacy of World War II. That's why I've given you the chance to make a posting about the documentary World War II from Space, to remind you that the world we live in was built by the people who survived it. International studies at Fordham. International studies at Fordham emerged from the regional studies programs like Middle East Studies and Latin American Studies. They were all gathered together under the umbrella International and Intercultural Studies, and in 2009 Fordham established the Global Track, on which students write a thesis comparing countries in two different regions of the world. Today in 2020, the vast majority of IS majors at Fordham are on what is now called the Global Affairs Track. International Studies has come out from the shadow of the regional studies programs and emerged as one of the largest undergraduate majors at Fordham. Interdisciplinary. International studies is not the same as international relations. IS is the interdisciplinary study of globalization. IR is that part of political science focused on the international state system and great power politics. You've got to get this right. IS and IR are not the same at all, and the difference between them is highly illuminating. International relations is a sub-discipline of political science. International studies is an interdisciplinary program. This makes international studies unusually challenging as an undergraduate major because you've got to provide the orientation that would normally come from the discipline. You do this by taking courses in different disciplines and finding the lodestar of your IS major, the topic of your IS senior thesis. You have to figure out for yourself the sense of direction you would normally get from your professors. Since they're all from different disciplines, you have to pick out your own path. IS is so new, there's no consensus on its methods. Some of your professors might think IS should be like economics and have hard data and hypotheses. Some of your professors might think IS should be like anthropology and depend on talking to people and understanding their meanings. Some of your professors might think IS should be considered part of the humanities because it turns on fathoming the ripples and eddies of vast geographical and historical currents. Interdisciplinary thinking is hard work, even for professors, because it means being open to a wider variety of theories and methods than you'd find in any one discipline. You have to be a jack of all trades and have a knack for abstraction. It's the academic equivalent of being a triathlete. It means finding a path for yourself and planning semesters ahead. Being an IS major is no small undertaking. The disciplines of international studies. I want to get you to think about the relationship between the disciplines of international studies using this table. Now then, this is a very 20th century way of thinking about the way nations work. Economics and politics weren't separate disciplines in the 19th century. There was just one political economy. This way of thinking about the world in terms of discrete disciplines is a result of the establishment of departments in universities, mostly in the second half of the 20th century. I have placed economics and political science across the top and sociology and anthropology across the bottom. Please notice that history is up and down and geography is back and forth. I want you to think about this as a comparative framework you're imposing on top of a nation to get a read on how it differs from all the others. You already know about the relationship between money and politics and how the one influences the other. Well, the relationship between social structure and culture also sloshes back and forth. The relationship between social structure and culture is like the relationship between the school building and the lessons children are taught, or between the playground equipment and the games children play. The buildings and equipment are much the same in every country, but the lessons and the games differ. If there is an essence to international studies, it is to have a geographical sensibility. International studies is about bringing geography back in and highlighting the point that it's not one world at all. It might be better thought of as many worlds, more and more peoples every day, all of them wrestling with the promise of modernity. Modernization as the wheel. I want you to think of modernization as a matter of turning the wheel. All four quadrants have to turn together. It's hard to make it happen. It only happens in rare historical circumstances. In the famous American case, the lessons of wartime production and the political consensus about post-war progress produced a wave of prosperity and social change in the 1960s. Large-scale society-wide transformations like suburbanization, women going to work, and civil rights brought about a whole new America. These changes in turn brought a huge pushback from white America in the 1970s and 1980s. The events of that era forged the political culture for decades to come. Social change sped up, but was then slowed down again. Modernization is always like this. The wheel of history rocks back and forth. Progress is only a smooth path looking back. At the time, it's a matter of great leaps forward and then great leaps back. We'll see that in Carroll's book with Iran. A leader wants to modernize, the Shah, versus traditionalists in the mosques and countryside who fear that change is moving too fast and they are getting left behind. Globalization. International studies is the interdisciplinary study of globalization. By globalization, I mean the present era and the liberal international order that grew after World War II. The remit of international studies is the world since 1945. There's broad agreement that we've been through two periods. One, the long boom, which ran into a bust in the 1970s. It's synonymous with suburbanization at home and the Cold War abroad. This one is the shorter of the two periods. Number two, a neoconservative and later neoliberal era that followed, which went bust in 2008 and then hobbled along under assault from various nationalists for a decade before it got swamped by the pandemic in 2020. Note that even though the first period is foundational, the second period is the longer of the two. Global politics. In international relations, the key events in global politics in the post-war era are the Cold War, Nixon's opening to China, détente with the Soviets, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and 9/11. Globalization. In international studies, we have to look beyond global politics to the broader phenomena of globalization. We have to think about what economists and anthropologists and sociologists bring to the table as well. Let's go back to the wheel. I want you to notice something odd about the left and right-hand sides of the table. Everywhere you go in the world, the left-hand side, the economy and social structure, is the same, and everywhere you go in the world, the right-hand side, the political system and culture, is different. On the left-hand side, every country you go to, the economy is dependent on its integration into a global system of trade. In the social structure box, every country in the world uses concrete and rebar to put up buildings and imports soy to feed livestock. The left-hand side of the diagram represents the overwhelming clockwise force of finance, engineering and logistics trying to turn the wheel. On the right-hand side, every country you go to has a different political system and lots of different cultures, languages, cuisines and music. Every nation has its own recipes for ideology, and of course it's entirely normal for the regions to have their beefs with the metropolis. The right-hand side of the diagram represents the overwhelming counterclockwise forces of local cultures and religion, ready to throw up rebellions whenever the opportunity arises.